Hey guys and girls, welcome to your writing lesson today. Let's begin with your learning target. I can write a fictional narrative story. Remember, a fictional narrative story is a story that is not true, it's imaginative, it's made up. You can have a realistic fiction story or an unrealistic fictional story. Realistic fiction is a story that has not happened before, but it could. So there would be real people, real animals, real places in your story with real events that could happen in real life. That would be realistic fiction. Unrealistic fiction is going to be the opposite. That's going to have you're going to have your magic and your talking animals and your made up places, things that cannot happen in real life. We've already decided whether or not our first fictional narrative story is going to be realistic or unrealistic. We have decided on the characters, the setting, the problem, and the solution in our story. And today we're going to check out something new called point of view. Before we do that, though, I want us to read a mentor text titled The Piano. As I read the story out loud, I want you to focus on the main character, the setting, where and when does the story take place, the problem or challenge that the character has to go through, as well as the solution. How does that problem or challenge get solved or overcome? Now, the fifth thing that we're going to look at is point of view. Who is telling this story? The piano. So those are the 5 things that I want you to focus on as I'm reading today. Track me as I read. The piano. Once again, I watched as the family I have lived with for years pulled out of the garage. They didn't even look my way. I have lived with this family for 10 years. I have only been sad the last few years. That's when I was moved into the garage. However, it wasn't always this way. Many years ago, I belonged to a sweet young girl named Carol. I was a gift given to Carol for her 8th birthday. The sound I made when she pushed my keys made her smile. She began taking piano lessons. She learned to play short songs. She enjoyed playing me so much. She continued taking piano lessons. She learned to play the most beautiful tunes. Soon, Carol and I were spending lots of hours together. The hours turned into days. Carol and I became best friends. She learned to play all kinds of melodies on me. She would play songs for birthdays, holidays, and other special days. Suddenly, Carol got older and busier. She wasn't playing me as much as she used to. The days we spent together became less and less. A few years later, Carol's mother suggested that they move me into the garage. I was heartbroken. Off to the garage I went and have been here ever since. Carol hasn't played me since my move. A few days ago, a man came to see me. He played a few tunes on me, and Carol seemed a little sad. I heard Carol's mother say that it was a waste to keep me in the garage. It hurt to hear that. Then Carol came and played a song on me. She said goodbye, and I wondered where I was going. Today, a truck came to pick me up, and I was confused. Carol and her family waved goodbye. I felt like no one wanted me. I wondered where I was going. Maybe I was going to the dump or to a landfill. I was surprised when the man took me out of the truck. They carried me into a house. 2 boys ran up to me excitedly. They had huge smiles, and both boys sat on my bench together. They played the most wonderful song. The boys thanked their parents over and over. They were so happy to have me in their home. With each song they played, my heart filled up more and more. They played me until late that night. I never thought I could love anyone as much as Carol. However, the feeling I felt was love. I never thought I'd feel that feeling again. I was filled with joy. I was so happy to be with a family again. They were thrilled to have me in their home. My heart was full once again. Okay, so that's a pretty cool story, the piano. So the first thing we're going to look at or look for are the characters in the story. Remember, the characters can be people, or in this case, in fictional stories, it can be animals or objects that are not normally able to speak in real life. So who are the main characters? So let's go ahead and get our red, and let's underline or highlight our characters. So there was a little girl named Carol in the story. Her mom was the one who mentioned to get rid of the piano and put it out in the garage. So there's Carol's mother's another character. There's a man that came to see the piano, and then at the end of the story there were two boys. It said two boys ran up. So we don't know any of their names. The only person's name we know is Carol. But there's another character in here that keeps saying I watched as the family I have lived with. I have only been sad the last few years. I was moved into the garage. Who is that? Who was moved into the garage? Who used to be best friends with Carol? That's the piano. The piano is one of the characters in the story. So we've got the piano, we have Carol's mom, a man that came to see the piano, and then we have the two boys at the end who was playing the piano. All right, let's look for the setting. Let's see, go ahead and change colors to purple. Setting, remember, is where and when the story takes place. So it says we know that the piano was once in the garage. And whose garage was it? We can infer or make an inference that they're at Carol's house. It doesn't say that, but we know that the piano was in Carol's room, and then they moved it out to their garage. So it just makes sense that they're going to move it out to their garage at their home. Let's see. It says a few days ago, so that lets us know that it's daytime outside. So we've got daytime and we've got Carol's house in the garage. Okay, let's go ahead and look for the problem. Now, the problem can be something difficult or some kind of challenge that the characters need to overcome. In this story, it says that, the piano goes through the story about how they used to spend a lot of time together. As she got older, right here, she wasn't playing me as much as she used to. And then mom suggested that they move the piano into the garage, and the piano was heartbroken. So that's your main problem right there. Carol got older, she got busier, she stopped playing the piano, and then mom's like, well, let's just move the piano out into the garage and get it out of the way. And so the problem or the challenge was is that the piano was heartbroken, that Carol wasn't spending any time with it anymore. Okay, let's move on to the solution in blue. Now, our solution is, how does that problem get fixed? The piano's heartbroken because Carol's not playing it anymore. At the end of the story, which is where solutions usually occur, it tells us the very last paragraph, or the next to the last paragraph. It says they played the most wonderful song. The boys thanked their parents over and again. They were so happy to have me in their home. My heart filled up more and more. They played me until late that night. I never thought I could love anyone as much as Carol, but I was filled with joy. I was so happy to be with the family again. So at the end of the story, the way that the piano's problem of being heartbroken was solved was that it got taken in place with another family, and the boys were very happy to have it, and which made the piano feel better as well. And then lastly, let's look at orange. Who is telling the story? This is going to be our point of view. Now, you can have different points of view, but I want to point out that it says, I watched as the family I have lived with for years. I have lived with this family for 10 years. I have only been sad the last few years. That's when I was moved into the garage. That is a clue when you keep seeing I over and over and again. That's the main character telling the story. That means the character is actually in the story. And with the title being The Piano, that lets us know that piano is the main character in the story, and the piano in this story is telling the story. I never thought I could love anyone as much as Carol. That's the piano that's saying that. So this story is being told from the main character's point of view, the piano. Let's look at what point of view means. Point of view is the way someone views a situation. So think of, it's how they see the story happening through their eyes. Everyone's point of view is different because they might be a different age. They might have a different religion. They might have been on had different experiences or been on different trips. So when you're looking for the point of view, I want you to ask yourself, what is the author's point of view? And think, who is telling the story? Now, the main points of view that we're going to be looking at is that sometimes the main character is telling the story, as in the piano that we just read. But sometimes one of the secondary characters are telling the story. Remember, the main character is who the story is all about. The secondary characters are in the story, but they're not having the same experiences as the main character. They're in the story to help push the story along and to help tell the story. So sometimes you can have the main character telling the story, and sometimes you can have one of those secondary characters telling the story. But some stories even are told by someone who's not even in the story at all. Those people are called narrators. A narrator is just a storyteller. The narrator knows how everybody is feeling and is telling it from everyone's point of view, from outside of the story. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. Today, we're going to make a plan about our fictional narrative story. We're going to plan out or brainstorm 3 different possible ways that our story could be told. We need to decide who's going to tell our story. How do they see the story unfolding? So we're going to tell it from the main character's point of view. My main character in my story, remember, is Cody. Cody's the 8-year-old boy. Remember, they're at the zoo, and they notice that one of the goats is outside of the enclosure as they're feeding them at the petting zoo. So if Cody was telling the story, he would talk about how the goat is following him and trying to eat his sweater. Because remember, as part of my solution, they're going to lure the goat back into the pen. So Cody's going to be telling the story. How does he feel as the goat is following him, trying to eat his sweater? Now, a secondary character in my story was Alex, his best friend. So if Alex was telling the story, Alex could talk about being nervous about the goat and whether or not they were going to get in trouble by Mr. Larson or Sarah, the zookeeper. Alex wouldn't know how Cody is feeling when he's holding that sweater trying to lure the goat back into the pen, okay? Cody wouldn't know how Alex is feeling nervous. So that's 2 different points of view. They're going to be seeing the story through different sets of eyes, and they're going to have different feelings about it. Lastly, if a narrator was telling my story, this would be somebody on the outside. The narrator could tell about how Cody and Alex and the teacher are all feeling throughout the story. The narrator is like all-knowing. The narrator's not in the story, so the narrator's not going to be at the zoo. The narrator's not friends with Cody and Alex. The narrator is simply telling the story from the outside part of the story. And it's an outside view, kind of looking in. So today what I want you to do is you're going to head over to Seesaw and you're going to brainstorm 3 different possible points of view for your first fictional story. You've already planned out your characters, your setting, your problem and solution. So today I want you to write 3 possible points of views, 1 from your main character, 1 from one of your secondary characters, and then the last one from your narrator. And you're just making a plan. We're still planning. We're not writing the story, but we need to know who's going to be telling your story before we start writing so that it makes sense, because you want the same person to be telling the story, the entire story. You don't want to swap from your main character to the narrator telling the story, because that gets kind of confusing to your readers. So head on over to Seesaw. Complete your point of view chart by brainstorming 3 different possible points of view, 1 from your main character, 1 from one of your secondary characters, and then your last point of view from a narrator, a person looking in, a person just telling the stories. Have fun and happy writing!